why does God do this to us? Why does God send little David to go fight a Goliath? Why does he ask for 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed a multitude? He moves into that position at work and moves you into that space. He moves you into that ministry opportunity, or maybe it's that degree that you are up against. Why does God put us in situation where we are in over our heads? And you're thinking, listen, I'm inadequate for what you're asking me to do, God. I don't have what it takes. God thrives in our lives in areas where we don't have all the answers. We don't have all the talents. We don't have all the giftings. We don't have all the abilities. We don't have all the skills. We don't have all the knowledge, where we must depend on him to make up our lack in life. Paul personalized it. It's so good for us. He said, I will boast in my weakness. Why? Because in my weakness, God's strength is made perfect. God doesn't want us boasting in our ability. He wants us boasting in his ability. And God does these things. Judges 7:2 says to Gideon, I'm doing this because I don't want Israel to boast against me, saying my own hands, my own strength has saved me. Let's get this big picture. Gideon has 32,000 men, and the Midianites, they have 135,000 men. And God says, it's too much for me to deliver with. Wait, God, that's basic math. You see, because 135,000 is greater than 32,000, no matter what testament you're in, Old Testament or New Testament. No matter what country you're in, Zimbabwe or America, it is the same thing. I am outnumbered, God. But Gideon nonetheless dwindles his army down from 32,000 to 10,000. To make matters worse, God tells Gideon 10,000 is still too much. And he has him dwindle down his army again to 300 against Midian's 135,000. That is 4-1. And God looks at that and says, now you're ready, Gideon. This is great. And Gideon is probably like, what? I'm gonna die. And God says, this is perfect. Now you are ready for battle. And God gives Gideon the victory just because Gideon did exactly what God told him to do. You know what I realize? This story isn't about Gideon. This whole thing that we're reading, it's not about Gideon. It's not about Gideon's strength. It's not about his strategy. It's not about his wisdom. It's about a God who is great and mighty and desires to use ordinary people to do extraordinary things. This whole story is about the God that we serve. God, each way, was not building Gideon's confidence within himself. God was building Gideon's confidence in God, the one who is able to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all we can ask, think, or imagine. You see, we wouldn't know about Gideon had God not shown up in his ordinary. We wouldn't know about David had God not showed up at his father's house to anoint the second king of Israel. And we wouldn't know about Esther, the orphan girl, living in exile in Susa. And God calls her to be the queen of the same place she was in exile in, to deliver the people of Israel for such a time as this. What we understand is, it's not about us. It's about what God wants to do through us. See, we all have a call. Ephesians 2:10 says we were created for good purpose and for good works, that we were masterpiece in God's hands for good works. But before we say yes to the call of God, we must understand some things about God's calling. All right, y'all, this is where it gets, you know what? You're either in it or you're not. Because I think everyone wants to be called, but no one wants to go through the process of what it means to be called. And so we have to go through what that process looks like. Okay, so what does God says about this call? Number one thing you need to know about the call of God is that you do not control who God calls. Give him all the excuse you want to. You do not control who God chooses to call. God's responsibility is to call you. Our responsibility is to answer to that call. Remember Moses? God, I can't speak right. I have a speech problem. And God said, take that same speech problem and go bring it before Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. Remember Jeremiah? I'm too young. And God uses him as a great prophet in the nation of Israel. God calls Gideon in his weakness. Gideon begins to give God all the excuses. I'm too young and I'm from the wrong family lineage. And God says, you are perfect. You can't tell a God who qualifies that you're not qualified, because he qualifies the unqualified. It's not you, it's the God who is in you. And God says, I have you, I see you, and I see the purposes that I placed inside of you. The second thing you need to know is you don't control what the call is. Gideon said to God, without knowing the details of the call, he says yes to God. You see, when you say yes to God, you don't say, but don't send me here, and don't ask me to do this, and don't ask me to give up that. That's God, that's calling on your terms. When you go to God and you say yes to his call, you say yes on God's terms, not your terms. The next thing we need to know is that you don't control where the call sends you. Gideon was outnumbered 4-1. He was walking into a slaughter. It looked like it was a dangerous circumstance that Gideon was in. And God says, I am with you, Gideon. Doesn't matter what it looks like. I go with you. You have no reason to fear. If God is for you, nothing can stand against you. You see, the worst place to be is outside the will of God. It's not the anaconda-infested jungles of the Amazon. It's not in the wrong place at a dark night in the wrong alley. If God sends you there, he'll protect you while you're there. The worst place to be is outside God's will. When you choose to do your own thing, when you choose to go your own way, you are moving yourself from underneath the protection of a mighty God. So I wonder, for those that are listening, I wonder what God's plans for your life is. I wonder if you've been trying to give God excuse to why you're not this enough, you're not that enough, you're not called enough, you're not educated enough, you don't have the enough stuff, whatever that is for you. And God is saying, I am enough. When you have me, you have everything. There is no lack concerning you. While God does call us and uses who he chooses, God's calling on our lives is often dependent upon us being available. We have to be available. The invitation is not by force. It requires your availability. You see, we think that it's all about our ability. But God said, it's about your availability. You see, if it was just about our ability, many of us will be canceled. We will be in that cancel culture. Saul was a persecutor. There's no ability in that. Rahab had a checkered past. The Samaritan woman had 5 husbands and a friend. Come on. And God still calls her into what he had for her. God is not looking for our ability. He's looking for our availability. He also looks for us to release control. To the degree you yield is the extent that God can use you. To the degree you surrender to God is the extent that God can say, yes, I want that one. I want to use this one. When Gideon reduced his army, he was releasing his control. He was saying, God, I know I'm going into a slaughterhouse, but I trust you more than I trust my army. I trust in your power more than I trust in the strength of horses. You know, David said it like this: some trust in horses, some in chariots, but I will trust in the name of the Lord my God. We have to surrender our control over our plans, our control over the tactics that we want to use to get ahead, the platforms that we want to have, the people that we want to meet so we can have them move our names up. God got to be in control of our lives. If you want that kind of calling, that's not the God calling that he's wanting. He's wanting the calling that you say, wherever you send me, I will go. Whatever you ask me to do, I will do. If you send me into a dangerous situation, God, I'm all yours. I'm the man that you want. I'm the woman that you want. We don't pursue the call. We pursue Jesus. And the call will pursue us. So we go with the right heart. Gideon was fully yielded and surrendered to God. There are people that it's possible to go where God sends you with a heart that's not aligned with his. Jonah went to Nineveh, but his heart wasn't aligned with God. His heart was still stuck in the boat of bitterness. It was not fully yielded to God. And I want to challenge us to make sure that we don't have outward obedience while having inward rebellion. towards God, that we are fully surrendered to God. And then finally, you want to be successful in your call? The success of your call will rely on your belief in God. There's certain people who say, I believe God, until they're stuck in a situation and the enemy is all around them. You will know what you believe about God when you're in over your head and fear is looming around you. Do you still believe God when you're outnumbered 4-1? Do you still believe God? Remember the 10 spies, the 12 spies went into the promised land. God told them, I'm giving you the promised land. It's yours. They went there, they began to survey, and they saw the giants. And suddenly what they believed about God was trumped by the giants that they saw. We can't move by our sight. We can't trust in our 2020 vision. We gotta trust in what God said, not what we see with our eyes. Gideon saw the 135,000, but he heard the sound of victory. He heard a sound of victory from his God. It didn't matter what he saw. All that mattered for Gideon is what God said. Do you believe in what God said? Do you believe that you're called? Do you believe that you're purpose? Do you believe that God has a plan and a purpose for your life? You see, belief is a resolve in your mind that I'm going to believe no matter what I see.